All right, it is now 1 o'clock, so I think we will get started. There'll probably be a few more people joining us, but we can start the introduction. So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Global Action Plan's webinar on investigating the true cost of wood burning stoves. I'm Tessa Bartholomew Good. I'm the head of campaigns here at Global Action Plan, working on our clean air portfolio. So, Global Action Plan, for those of you who don't know, is an environmental charity focused on issues where the connection between the health of people and our planet is most tangible. And what we do is we mobilize people and organizations to take action on the systems that harm us and our planet. And one of our current focus issues is on air pollution. So many of you who might have heard of Global Action Plan might know us as the team behind Clean Air Day, which happens every June for the last 6 years. And this morning's or this afternoon's event will dive into some of the key findings from some recent research that we did on the economic cost of wood burning, which was carried out by Global Action Plan and Impacts on Urban Health. And this research will look into the kind of comparing the cost of heating your home through wood burning and other forms of heating. But first, to kick off our session, I'll be talking through the launch of our new sister campaign, Clean Air Night, which solely focuses on wood burning, to talk through our campaign goals, how you can get involved, and some more information about the campaign. Then Lucy Anderson, who is our head of research and impact, will take us through some of the key findings of our cost analysis research. And just a little before we dive into this, we want to be as useful as possible for those attending and really encourage you to please use the Q&A function to ask any questions and share anything appropriate for the discussion. Lucy and I will be answering any questions at the end of the session. And just before we kick off the rest of it, a little bit of housekeeping to be aware of. We do have closed captions available. So if you would like to see them, please enable them using the closed caption button. Should be at the bottom of your screen there. But we won't be sharing the Q&A part of the session. So we really want to make everyone feel as comfortable as possible asking questions. So we'll only be sharing the first part of the webinar, and the presentations will be available online afterwards. Great. If you can move on to the next slide, please, Sonia. So a little bit of background to kind of why we're talking about domestic burning. When we say domestic burning, this is basically burning in our homes, including wood, coal, and other forms of solid fuel. And we're looking at wood burning in particular today because that makes 75% of the category of domestic burning. And it's the kind of term that most of the public really kind of consider when it comes to log burners and open fires. Next slide, please. So what do we know about domestic burning? What's the issue behind it? There's a lot of information on this slide, but we just wanted to kind of give you an overview of why this is a problem. So what we do know is that it is very harmful to human health. So domestic burning as a category is the largest source of PM2.5, which is the really small particle pollution, which the World Health Organization has designated as the most harmful air pollution to human health. And the reason for this is because even though you sometimes can't see it, you breathe it in, it gets into your bloodstream, it can travel to every organ in your body. We know it's harmful for the environment. So there's research that shows that for the same amount of heat or energy, burning wood releases more carbon dioxide than oil or gas. We also know when it comes to kind of being able to plant enough trees to regenerate the amount of trees that are cut down to burn, there's some challenges there in terms of timing. We know that it's an urban luxury that is not necessarily a necessity. So only 8% of indoor burners actually use it as their primary heat source. So everyone else has another option to heat their home. And over twice as many people who burn indoors live in towns or cities than in rural areas. So just to be really clear, when we're talking about kind of the change that we as Global Action Plan want to see around indoor burning, this is really kind of an urban towns area issue rather than people who live in the countryside who have no other option to heat their home. We also know that there's a cost to both public health and the society at large. So health-related social costs. So, for example, cost to health services, days off work, of heating and cooking in the UK equates to about 2.7 billion pounds. 2.7 billion euros. And we know that 40% of these costs, around 1 billion euros, comes from wood burning stoves. What we are also starting to see over the last kind of few years, especially in the cost of living crisis, is there's an increased demand. So we're, before the cost of living crisis even entered into our worlds, there was an increase in PM 2.5 emissions between 2011 and 2021. So that increased by 124%. And we also know that the sales of wood burning stoves are growing really fast. We've done a lot of research with Impacts on Urban Health and other organizations to really try to understand where's the public at in terms of knowledge and attitudes and behaviors. And the kind of biggest thing that stands out to us is just how low public knowledge is when it comes to the awareness of wood burning stoves and open fires being linked to, first, even air pollution in general, and secondly, the health harms that come associated with that. Next slide, please. And so we've been working with a few different organizations to really think through where we need to go and kind of what our current strategy is when it comes to reducing wood burning effectively. And we think of this in kind of two different prongs. There's both how we engage the public and how we engage policymakers. And you need both in order to have kind of effective, long-term, sustained change. And we know that we're really much at the beginning of this journey. So we're not even really in the kind of behavior change realm at the moment. People have such low knowledge. They really just need to know the facts. They need to understand the link between indoor wood burning and air pollution and the other kind of facts associated with it before we can even start kind of nudging attitudinal change and behavior change, and then eventually, hopefully, government legislation that would make it easier for people to make healthier choices. Next slide, please. And so that's why we as Global Action Plan are really excited to announce our sister campaign of Clean Air Night. So this is something that we've been wanting to do for a while now. And we're launching it on Wednesday, the 24th of January. And the focus is shining a light on the uncomfortable truth of wood burning. So we've always had, for the last 6 years, we've had Clean Air Day, and we've not been able to talk about domestic burning as a topic because it's mostly a winter behavior and it just didn't quite fit in with the summer campaign. So this is something that is really helpfully kind of singling out domestic burning as a topic and a time that is appropriate to be talking about it, and really helping kind of share the evidence base behind the harms of wood burning. Next slide, please. So this is the first time that we're doing this campaign. It's England-wide, and what we will be doing is kind of a 4-week campaign lead up to the night itself. So it will all be culminating on Wednesday, the 24th of January. We're hosting a Clean Air Night Summit, which will have different experts talking about the different facts that we're trying to land with the campaign. But in the 4 weeks leading up to this, with a little bit of a break for the holidays in between, we will be empowering organizations, supporter organizations, to share the key messages through social media, through newsletters, through any kind of channels they have to their networks to get this information out there. So this is all shared through supporters and partners, hopefully like some of yourselves on the call today, to get this information out to the public. Next slide, please. And so we just wanted to talk through a little bit of the messaging and the insights, the public insights that sit behind why we're talking about burning in the way that we are. So we know that knowledge is really low, and we know that this is, wood burning is a really kind of emotional, nostalgic topic for a lot of people. And what we've seen through different kind of quant and qualitative research that we've done, there seem to be these 3 emerging myths about wood burning that are really standing in the way of the public engaging in the kind of real health impact of wood burning. And these myths are that people perceive wood burning to be cheaper than other forms of heating. And that's part of the reason why we're talking about this research today. And part of the reason why we did this research is we wanted to really try to uncover if that was true or not. The myth around wood burning being environmentally friendly or carbon neutral. So there are stoves that have kind of an eco label, and it wouldn't be kind of surprising for people to think that they might be environmentally friendly, but we know from looking at the evidence that this is quite misleading and actually is not a kind of the environmentally friendly way of heating your home that it's sometimes perceived as. And the myth that wood burning is not a major source of air pollution. So people not really realizing this to be true. So we think that these myths are really stopping people from accepting the kind of full health harms of wood burning. Next slide, please. And so what our campaign's trying to do this year is really kind of being a myth-busting campaign. So we are kind of turning these myths into truths. And part of what this research allows us to do is be able to say wood burning is more expensive than central heating or other forms of heating your home. Lucy will talk about the slight caveat. So in most cases, it is more expensive unless you're actually foraging for the wood yourself. Wood burning is not environmentally friendly or carbon neutral, and fires in the homes are the largest source of small particle pollution. So once we land those truths, we're then able to talk about kind of wood burning harming everyone's health. Next slide, please. And I'll remind you all at the end of the presentation as well, but just wanted to share how you can get involved. And this is both for kind of organizations, individuals, healthcare professionals, schools. There's a way that anyone can get involved. And the steps are you scan this QR code with your phone to sign up to our newsletter. So the first one is if you are a not-for-profit organization, so if you're a local authority or an NGO, you can become an official supporter of Clean Air Night, which is a really exciting way to get involved with the first year. And the way you do that is by emailing this email, cleanerair@globalactionplan.org.uk. And the way that we communicate with both supporters and other individuals and organizations or businesses that want to participate is by signing up to our newsletter. So that's where all of our kind of free campaign resources that the team's been working really hard on to create in terms of social media assets, newsletter copy, will all be sent through this newsletter. And you will also get an invite to the Clean Air Summit, which is happening on the 24th of January. What we then ask people who are kind of engaging or official supporters of the campaign to do is share the key facts. So we have one of the key resources is this communications toolkit, and all of the facts that are all evidence-based and peer-reviewed are in that toolkit and kind of brought to life in a really engaging way. And yeah, finally, please do attend the Clean Air Night Summit. So there'll be more information sent through on that via our newsletter. Next slide, please. So this is where I'll hand over to Lucy.
Thank you so much, Tessa. I hope that you can hear me okay. Yes, I'm Lucy Anderson. I'm Global Action Plan's Head of Research and Impact. And yeah, I'm going to talk you through some of the recent research that we've conducted looking at the economic cost of wood burning to households in the UK. Let's hope that the remote slide is going to let me. There we go. Right. So why are we wanting to look at the economic cost of wood burning? Well, we've seen a lot of media coverage in the last year that has suggested, in the context of the cost of living crisis, that wood burners are being positioned as a cheaper source of heating, an off-grid source of heating, giving people more energy security and giving people a cheaper heating option when they don't want to be paying sort of hiked bills. And we were really interested to understand whether this was actually the case. You know, we couldn't find lots of strong evidence to suggest that it was a cheaper source of heating. So we wanted to do the research to find out, because obviously there's a big public health impact if it is a cheaper source of heating, and lots of people are turning to using wood burners for heat. So the idea of this research was to really sort of dig into that question. So we've already heard from Tessa's talk earlier that wood burning is often being positioned as a cheaper source of heating in the media, and it's also being perceived by members of the public as a cheaper source of heating, certainly in the last year or so. As a result of that, sales of wood burners are on the rise. We know that sales rose by 40% over the past year, and that is a trend that's expected to be repeated this year, if not increase. Because of the cost of wood as well, waste wood, people are beginning to burn waste wood. This can obviously have really dangerous effects, because often waste wood is coated with varnishes and glues and we don't know the source of it. So it's really worrying to us that people are starting to turn to those sources of wood that are potentially dangerous to burn. And as a result of this, arsenic was found in London air for the first time last winter, which is probably a result of people burning things like waste wood. And last winter, London saw the highest levels of PM 2.5, and researchers from Imperial were able to identify the source of that PM 2.5 as coming from wood burning. So we worked with two researchers, Dr. Donal Brown and Dr. Gesche Hübner from the Sustainable Design Collective and the UCL Energy Institute, respectively, to do some economic modelling. So we did a literature review to find the latest evidence on the cost of wood burning and also the cost of different energy sources. So we took information from Cornwall Insight and Ofgem to look at sort of price trends over the next 15 years. So not just taking a sort of snapshot in time, just for reference as well. This work was done in March 2023. So we did some modelling analysis, which I'm going to come on to talk about, and we wanted to look at both the economic costs, the health costs and the environmental costs, although today's talk we will be focusing on the economic costs to individuals. So we wanted to sort of model two real life scenarios. So we looked at two different households, typical urban households, a family of four with one parent working full-time out of the house, the other working part-time from home. They had children who were at school most days, but around in the evenings and at weekends, so obviously wanting to heat the house during those time periods. And also an older couple who were both retired and spent most of the day at home or in the neighbourhood. So they were perhaps heating their house more frequently, but to a lesser extent, because perhaps they weren't heating spare bedrooms and things like that. The full details of this, by the way, are in the report that we'll share. And we looked at 5 heating scenarios. So just to give you some more context, we modelled this on a mid-terrace, late Victorian terraced house, which had loft insulation and double glazing. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of the insulation around the house. The 5 scenarios that we looked at were using a gas boiler for 100% of heat. And that was really important to us as a central scenario, because we know that 85% of households across the UK have a gas boiler. So that's a sort of primary heat source in households across the UK. So it was really important to us to compare to that. We then looked at the cost of, we looked at a scenario where a newly installed wood burning stove was used for 80% of heat, with gas central heating as a secondary heat source. So perhaps the wood burning stove was used later in the daytime, but some gas central heating was still used in the morning or in the bathrooms, certain parts of the house. We looked at an existing gas boiler being used for the majority of heating, but a newly installed wood burning stove used for secondary heating, so perhaps just in the evenings and turning the gas central heating off at that time. We looked at a gas boiler with an existing wood burner stove being used as secondary heating. And we also wanted to look at a sort of future-facing scenario where people getting to the end of perhaps using a gas boiler and instead thinking about using air source heat pumps, so that we could compare a sort of cleaner energy scenario to those that we were looking at with wood burners and gas boilers. Yes, I think, I just wanted to also mention that, so in scenarios B and E, we have factored in the cost of installing a wood burning stove and also an air source heat pump. But in the other scenarios, we are sort of accepting that those, the stove and the gas boiler are already in place. So, and we're just looking at maintenance costs. So things like chimney sweeping, cost of fuel, the cost of maintenance. So what did we find? We found that wood burners are almost always more expensive than other forms of heating if you have to buy the wood. So in other words, unless you have access to your own source of wood, a private woodland, private sort of access to wood, because it's not in fact legal to forage from owned woodlands, it's more expensive to use a wood burner in those scenarios. And obviously as well, if you're using waste wood, there are other health impacts associated with that. So I'm just going to dig into those results a little bit now. So in this slide, I'm comparing the gas central heating scenario. So that is the pink column on the 2 graphs. So on the left-hand side of this graph, we can, this is the sort of scenarios for the family of 4. On the right side chunk, those columns are the older couple, the house scenario with the older couple. So the pink column in both of those is the cost of gas central heating. So we can see that for a family of 4 in a mid-terraced house, we estimated that the annual cost of gas central heating was around £1,800 for the family of 4 and around £1,650 for the older couple. When we compare that to a household using a newly installed eco-design wood burner, so that's a DEFRA approved eco-design wood burner for 20% of its heat, it costs 24% more than using a gas boiler alone. So that's the yellow line on the graph here. But when we looked at the households using a newly installed wood burner for 80% of their heat, that cost rose to almost 50% more than using a gas boiler alone. So a really significant jump in the cost of heating, around £1,000 more in both scenarios. And even when a wood burner was already installed, annual ownership costs were still 15% higher if it was used for 20% of heat than using a gas boiler alone. And when we looked at air source heat pumps, we found similar results. So skipped forward a slide. Try and get back. There we go. So despite the initial outlay associated with an air source heat pump, over a 15-year period, they were also cheaper than burning wood or burning a combination of wood and using gas central heating as a source of heat. That ranged from between 6%, so it was 6% cheaper each year, or up to 30%. Sorry, I'll switch it the other way around. It's probably more easy to understand. So it was between 6 and 30% more expensive to use gas central heating and a wood burner compared to an air source heat pump. So that was averaged out, an annual average over a 15-year period. And then just to sort of explain, there's huge variability in the cost of wood. So I want to explain what we based these different scenarios on in terms of the cost of wood fuel. So we know that the cost of UK wood fuel has increased by about 44% over the last 5 years. And when we dug into some of the media claims that we saw around a year ago now in the media suggesting that wood burning stoves were a cheaper source of energy, really, they were based on a fairly unrealistic price of wood from our research suggests. So the media headlines suggested that the price of wood was around 10 to 11 pence per kilowatt hour. So this is the column on the far left of the graph. We tried to find sources of wood that cost that much, essentially, by doing a sort of mystery shopping exercise. So we looked at the cost of wood from different sources, including buying it in bulk online and also buying it from a supermarket or a garage, a local non-specialist supplier. And we found it quite difficult to find any sources of wood that were as cheap as those articles suggest. In fact, when people were buying wood from specialist suppliers like supermarkets and garages, sometimes they were spending 4 times more than the cost of central heating to heat their homes. So there's a real sort of range in the cost of wood burning depending on your source of wood. So in order to find a sort of central scenario, so we used a central price across all of these. We took an average because DEFRA and Kantar had done some research that looked at where consumers in the UK buy their logs from, essentially. So we know that around a third of indoor wood burners, so households that burn wood, by kindling and firelighters only, they're accessing their own wood. We know that around half buy online, so they sort of buy wood in bulk and have it delivered on pallets to their house. And around 20% buy it from non-specialist suppliers, so garages, supermarkets. And so we took a weighted average of all these sources and we used a central price of 14 pence per kilowatt hour for wood fuel. So just to give you some context on that. Oh no, I've gone forward too, sorry. So, and then we also looked at, I'm not going to delve too deeply into this today because we don't have huge amounts of time, but we also looked not only at the cost of wood burning to the individual households, but also the health impact of wood burning and the cost to society. So we used a formula called that DEFRA used called a damage costing, and this estimates the sort of cost to society per kilogram of exposure to different pollutants. So in this case, PM 2.5 emissions. And we found that when a household was using an eco-design stove and well-seasoned wood, the costs to society of that household's exposure to PM 2.5 was around £9,000 over the 15-year period. about £8,000 for the older couple. But these costs rise significantly when people are using older models of wood burner and damp wood, or wood that hasn't been dried, either kiln dried or left to dry for a couple of years before being used. There are much higher amounts of PM 2.5 emissions when wood is wetter and hasn't been fully dried. And also older stoves are associated with far higher PM 2.5 emissions than some of the newer models, despite the fact that new models still emit 3 times more PM 2.5 into a household than using something like gas central heating. And when we look at the breakdown of what those costs are associated with, we know that most of the costs are associated with the effect of long-term exposure to PM 2.5 on mortality, also increases in asthma incidents, increases in stroke incidents, heart attacks, and reduced productivity. So these are the sort of costs to society of people being exposed to PM 2.5 from wood burning. So in summary, we know that wood burners are at least 15% more expensive than using gas central heating to heat a home. And that's when you already have a wood burner installed and you're not having to pay for having the installation as well as maintaining it. But this cost rises to 50% more than using gas central heating alone when a newly installed wood burner is used and it supplies 80% of heat. So these are the households that perhaps believed that using a wood burner instead of central heating would save them money. In fact, they could be paying at least 50% more. But when the wood is sourced from supermarkets and garages and quite expensive sources, it can be up to sort of 3 or 4 times more than using a gas boiler. And then looking to the future, we really need leaders to provide subsidies to make sustainable options like air source heat pumps more affordable for that initial outlay, so that people can benefit from not only the health benefits of having cleaner energy, but also the financial benefits too. So we hope that sharing some of this evidence with you has helped to dispel this myth that wood burning is a more expensive, so we found that wood burning is more expensive than central heating, and we hope that we've managed to dispel the myth that it's a cheaper source of heating, as well as explaining some of the other truths to you. And I just want to remind you all of Clean Air Night happening on the 24th of January. And I'll also share this link as well to get more information on the communications toolkit. And then we're going to go to questions now. So you should be able to add questions. I can probably see that you have already. And Tessa and I will start to go through those. So thank you very much.